A Ferrari F50, a street-legal road car directly derived from Formula One. One of the fastest cars on Earth, capable of 325 kilometers per hour. At that speed, it will cover 5.41 kilometers per minute, the length of a football field every second. The way the brain and the body react to driving at high speed is being measured during this run on a closed road, the Beartooth Highway in Montana. Increased heart rate, heightened awareness, erratic breathing, all triggered by chemical responses that biologically signal fear, panic. But what this driver feels is pleasure. It's not just speed that generates pleasure. After all, sitting in an airplane at 3 times this speed puts most people to sleep. It's not just technology that makes fast cars special. Even though, technically, these cars are amongst the most advanced machines in motoring's history. Impractical, expensive, wasteful even. And yet there's something inside most humans that responds to these exceptional cars.
The most important thing that people want, and in fact miss in most production automobiles, is a character.
I don't know if we do the best car in the world, but for sure I want to do cars that as soon as you drive this car, you say to yourself, listen, I live once, I want to buy this car.
The truly great automobiles of the past, of the present, and I'm sure of the future, are the ones that exhibit some character.
We moved the behavior of the car a little bit closer to the borders of the physics. Or we moved the borders of physics a little bit.
When you drive a Ferrari, you feel something very, very, very peculiar. Maybe it's the music of the engine, maybe it's the gearbox, maybe it's the atmosphere in the cockpit, maybe it's the design, maybe it's the acceleration. But it's a mix of very different elements that create emotion of driving.
3 car makers, Ferrari, Callaway and Porsche. Each has a common goal, to build the best and the fastest road-going cars on Earth. But each with a different way of achieving that desire. The Ferrari F50, Italian flair. Boldest in concept and so operatic in execution. Ferrari has been producing fast and stylish cars for over 50 years. Their intention is that every new model will be faster and more beautiful than the one before. Their expectation is that every car will be a classic. Porsche, German precision. A different design philosophy, cool technology, classic engineering. In various guises, this model, the 911, has been a classic for 30 years. The shape's familiar, but beneath the skin is one of the fastest cars Porsche has ever produced. Twin turbos, 4-wheel drive. Top speed 290 kilometers per hour. 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in only 4.5 seconds. Packed with more computing power than took man to the moon. The 911 is arguably the most successful fast car ever produced, and the 911 Turbo 4-wheel drive the most advanced. In many ways it looks and sounds the least contemporary. But Porsche's improvements year by year have been incremental. They've been concentrating on the way a car should work, This car is the result of the persistent application of science, technical ingenuity. The Callaway Corvette, American muscle, brash and visceral. A standard Chevrolet Corvette will reach 257 kilometers per hour. This one will do 283. Reeves Callaway takes a car that most people consider is already a fast car and makes it even faster.
We were hired by Chevrolet to improve their product. I shouldn't say improve. I should say focus the product in a way that would appeal to a certain kind of customer. Our job for all of the car companies that we work for is usually to start with a basic unit and see how much more we could produce reliably, cost-effectively, and within emission constraints. The Chevrolet Small Block V8 is one of the most, I think it's probably the most popular basic engine to modify for racing purposes. And as a result, the population of special parts available for these engines far exceeds almost any other type. You're not stupid if you decide you're going to use the Chevrolet V8 as a basis.
Through a series of naturally aspirated techniques, we optimize the internal components of the engine to maximize its efficiency. And that's what we do through the supernatural technique. The first thing is building horsepower. And actually building the horsepower in relative terms is easy. The second thing we look at is actually making it reliable. So now we're making reliable horsepower. The third thing that we do is make it drivable. This is where we're starting to distinguish ourselves from other tuners or modifiers. We're now making drivable, reliable horsepower. And the fourth thing that we do, which really separates us from most tuners or so-called hot rodders, and makes us known for the engineering prowess that we have, is that we can make this emission compliant.
The physics that are involved in making something as archaic as an internal combustion engine work, if you think about them too long, you go crazy. The device normally shouldn't work very well. But in fact, after 100 years of development, it is a triumph of execution over design.
A really good car gives feedback to the road and becomes an extension of the driver. The whole thing becomes a driving system. The automobile, the highway, the driver, the surrounding conditions, all of those things work together to create a system that's within the driver's control. The driver has control of that entire little universe. And even dealing with things like traffic and other things that intrude into that system, the driver of the car still has control over all of that stuff. I think that's a rare experience for all of us.
Building a powerful engine is not enough. It's not just the engine that makes a Ferrari F50 perform at the limit like this. To go this fast and still be safe, it must have balance. Drivers talk a lot about balance, especially through corners. At the limit of adhesion, it feels as if the car is on tiptoes, dancing through the apex. All that maintains the balance between opposing and powerful forces is the car's chassis, suspension, and tires.
The tires are the most important part of the vehicle, without question. Why? Because every movement you make, every thought you have, and every intention that you have has to be translated through the tires. The rest of the vehicle is along for the ride. As a matter of fact, you could take the position that everything in the vehicle is there in order to make the tires work, driver included.
Tires used to be 100% rubber. But as cars got quicker, customers needed more grip. So today, more than half the tire is synthetic. Ethyl benzene and butadiene give manufacturers control over the tire's compound, its characteristics. The ideal tire would never wear out, never get hot, would have no rolling resistance, and would have unlimited grip. In the real world, of course, that perfect combination is impossible. The tires on these cars are biased towards grip rather than durability, and they trade a soft ride for sharp handling. The right tires are essential. In fact, Ferrari's tire requirements were so specific that Goodyear had to design a special tire just for the F50. They're expensive. A set of tires costs close to $4,000, and you could wear them out in one afternoon on the track. Only when the car's on the right rubber can a designer concentrate on fine-tuning the next part of the package: suspension.
Well, the suspension is important in a subliminal kind of way because it controls how you feel when you ask the car to do something. And don't forget that most people think that the automobile is largely an extension of themselves, meaning themselves trying to move somewhere. So how well does it take your intention and turn it into motion? Does it respond right now? Is it a little slow? Does it roll a lot when it goes into a corner? Does it pitch or dive when you put the brakes on? Does it squat when you accelerate? Boy, that isn't an easy equation to define when you're doing the basic design of the vehicle. That's what comes from the development side of the thing.
And the best place for development is the racetrack. Callaway's race car is based on the Chevrolet Corvette frame, but the bodywork is all carbon fiber. Its 2-valve per cylinder aluminium V8 puts out more than 500 brake horsepower. In 1995, Callaway's race driver Almo Capelli drove this car to pole position at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, the world's toughest long-distance sports car race. Today, he's competing in the penultimate round of the SCCA World Challenge Series. He's leading the championship, but not by much. Almo's profession is a precarious one. As a race car driver, he must push the car to the limit, but not over it. To do that, he needs data. Information about how the car is handling, how close it is to failure, how close it is to the edge of control. Almo's mechanics get that information by telemetry, downloading data into a computer. Almo gets information from more sensitive sources.
There's two things, the steering wheel and your bottom when you are sitting in the seat, and all the sensation is coming from there. So sometimes you feel the front of the car very light. This means that you probably have too much grip on the rear and not on the front, and sometimes it's the same on the front compared to the rear.
Fine, that is fine. And you look good too.
Race cars are noisy, brutal, and hard to drive. Unlike a standard road car, a race car is infinitely adjustable. Throughout race weekend, Almo and the Callaway team have changed the gear ratios, suspension settings, and the aerodynamics to try and produce a car that is perfectly suited to this track on this day.
The perfect setup exists just in imagination. It's always a compromise. Obviously, you start the race and you have one condition, and then after 1 hour you have a completely different condition. So it's a compromise of balance the car. Basically, we try to have a base setup, and then you have to improve or you have to change your driving style.
The kinds of things that you expect to hear from a race car driver is, how was the car stability-wise? How was it straight line-wise? What happened in the initial degree of steering wheel turn-in? What happens when you are braking and turning at the same time? what happens when you are fully loaded laterally, and then what happens on the exit portion of the corner. And how was that whole transition managed? Those 5 or 6 kinds of discussion points are what you would go over again and again and again with every change that you make to springs, shocks, sway bars, stiffness.
No matter how well the race car is handling, and no matter how meticulously the team has worked on setup, racing conditions are unpredictable. And sometimes, something can happen that will upset a car's directional stability entirely. If Almo can just finish the race, he'll get enough points to win the championship. But as a driver, he has to be even more sensitive now to what the car is telling him. He must ask questions of the suspension, the tires, the chassis. They will tell him whether it's safe to go on. Ignoring or misinterpreting that conversation could cost him his life.
You can talk really mentally with the car, and the car talk with you. If you ask me how, it's impossible to explain. It's just a question of trust. So you have to really love the car and then listen what the car says. The car have a soul, that's for sure.
If the team gets the setup right on the track, rewards are immediate. The Callaway team rely on Almo to find the tiniest improvements. A 1/10 of a second quicker per lap can become a race-winning margin.
Almo, nice job.
The driver of the Callaway Corvette road car wants the same things from his car as the driver of the race car. Even though the average driver may not have the analytical skills of the race car driver, he'll know when the car feels right. But day-to-day driving conditions on the road are different to the racetrack, and the Callaway race car would be an impossible package put straight on the road.
A lot of people think, I want a racing car. I want a racing car on the road. I can tell you that's not what they want. And they will learn that very quickly. As you mature in your automotive desires, what you want really is something that is everything. You want a lot of power. You want a lot of style. You want something very exclusive, and you want it to be dead reliable. So you're asking for a little bit of a contradiction.
F50 was a very difficult technology goal. We wanted to do a Formula One with 2 seats, or let me say a Formula One for the roads. And that was a very, very difficult target to achieve.
Ferrari has a long tradition of racing. For its founder, Enzo Ferrari, racing always came first. Indeed, the sale of his road cars funded the race team. So he could never make the road cars appear less successful or less glamorous than the racing cars. Building a name and reputation on the track would mean nothing if the road cars didn't perform as well. So the road cars got better as the race cars got better.
Racing competition is the most important element of our tradition, of our history. Competition is something inside our body, something very, very important, more than important, is part of our life.
The F50 is derived directly from the hottest form of motorsport in the world, Formula One, where exotic materials, science and money combine to produce such awesome machines that only a handful of humans are skillful enough to drive them. In just 5 seconds, a Formula One Ferrari can be doing 210 kilometers per hour from a standing start. Formula One is so technically extreme that the cars are expendable. Constant development and improvements make last season's or even last weekend's car redundant. But a road car is built to last. Ferrari's challenge was to integrate as much Formula One technology as possible into a road car and still make it possible for the average owner to drive every day for many years.
F50 is the car that wants to celebrate 50 years of Ferrari. Is the first and the last Formula One 2 seats for the road. The first because nobody has done this before. The last because with the rules around the world will be impossible in the future to build such a car.
The F50 is built around its engine. A 4.7-litre 5-valve per cylinder V12. A race engine detuned to make it reliable. It's so efficient that above 4,000 RPM, its emissions are low enough that exhaust gases can bypass the catalytic converters entirely. It sits right behind the driver, just like Formula One. The engine and gearbox are load-bearing structures and support the rear suspension, like Formula One. Ferrari's building only 349 of these cars. And the qualifications for owning one are strict.
We have chosen the clients with 3 very important characteristics. They have to own minimum 2 other Ferraris. They have to be known by ourselves or by our dealers. And we have to be sure that they are not going to buy this car just to sell after 1 month.
The factory will always know how the car is being driven. Data about every aspect of the car's road life is fed into an onboard black box. That data can be reviewed at every service. Ferrari want this car to be driven hard. Weight is the enemy of acceleration, and weight distribution the key to good handling. So everything on the F50 is light and in the best possible place. This carbon fiber tub forms a light, strong shell around the driver, and the rest of the car is fastened to it. Again, the same as Formula One. Bolting the engine directly to the tub is one of those options the owner of a family car wouldn't like. Noise and vibration from the engine is transmitted directly into the seats. For the Ferrari driver, that just adds to the experience. The driver becomes a component too. This is truly a hand-built car. A small group of technicians follow the car along a short and highly specialized assembly line. This part of Italy has a tradition of craftsmanship that goes back hundreds of years. Nothing is rushed. No one works at night, and the factory closes at weekends. It's the Ferrari way. At Porsche in Stuttgart, cars are hand-assembled too. But machines regulate the pace. Cars are assembled to order here, so there is one line capable of handling any one of more than a dozen model variations that Porsche currently produce, from the 911 Turbo to the Boxster. The Boxster should be a big seller for Porsche. It's a mid-engine, water-cooled, high-performance car that would certainly be a success for any other sports car maker. But Porsche has to win over a customer base that is particularly loyal to one model, the 911. And that has evolved from a design philosophy that Ferdinand Porsche set 50 years ago. Horizontally opposed, rear engine, air-cooled. Even the shape of the 911 comes from its 50-year-old predecessor, the 356. For Porsche engineers, function has become more important than form. Marketing has provided the 911 design envelope in which they work. So where art exists in the technology, it comes second to utility. If it works, there's a place for it. If it looks good too, that's a bonus.
See, I'm an engineer. I think in equations, I think in those kind of things. So for me, it's difficult. If equations finally end up in nice shapes, so that's what we define engineering art.
So loyal are Porsche's customers to the original shape that the 911 has remained in production as other models have come and gone. It's been Porsche's most successful model, on the road and on the track.
I think Porsche without racing would not be what is Porsche of today. It's very important. Important is to decide what kind of racing. So it's really a racing that shows on the racetrack similar cars, similar shapes, similar products that we have on the road, that really the customer can identify with what we have and what we understand.
So Porsche too develops on the racetrack. It's where they learned about turbocharging before fitting it to a production car in 1974. As an option, turbocharging is attractive. It delivers larger amounts of power from only moderately sized engines. But there is a cost. Turbochargers generate extra heat. And in an engine, heat can be both an asset and a liability. The efficiency of an engine depends on the difference between its lowest and highest temperatures. Ideally, the air and fuel mixture coming into the combustion chamber should be cool and dense. When it ignites, it should be very hot and so greatly expanded. The higher the maximum temperature can be raised, the more efficiently and more powerfully the engine will run.
Turbocharged engines can help increasing that temperature, but you have to manage your materials. As I said, you have to transfer that heat, that all components in the combustion chamber are exceeded to. You have to bring that away. And that's really the secret. Or you have to use materials like ceramics that can withstand that high temperatures.
Gas temperatures in the combustion chamber where these pistons operate can be around 2000 degrees centigrade. But if the piston crown goes above 250 degrees, the oil will break down, clogging the oilways, and the engine will fail. Porsche engineers have learnt a lot about heat transfer in an air-cooled engine, how thick the cooling fin should be around the cylinder, the best ceramics to use for the valve seats, where the engine needs to be stronger to withstand the extra stresses turbos develop. The first Porsche turbocharged road car had a single turbo. This one has two. Porsche found a single turbo could dump too much power too suddenly into the rear wheels. The twin turbos are smaller, each driven by a symmetrically divided exhaust system. Smaller means lighter, lighter means less inertia, and less inertia means faster response to the throttle, less turbo lag. This car delivers large amounts of power more smoothly, and for the driver, this brings confidence.
The most important thing is that you have a safe feeling from the car, and the car should inspire you confidence that you can drive fast. You should be one part with the car, then only you can drive fast with this car. And it's also important that the car is very durability, that you can drive not only one fast lap, that you can drive 10, 20 laps with the same speed. Four-wheel drive car tendency is more to understeering, and so if you drive cornering with these cars, you have to lift a little bit the acceleration, that the car comes a little bit more in oversteering and the understeering tendency is not so hard, and then you have to push down the acceleration as soon as possible to get the car a little bit more in an oversteering condition.
This is a car of systems, a combination of technologies. The four-wheel drive system is unlike any other. It's dynamic, sharing power between front and rear depending on the driving demands of the moment. If the rear wheels lose grip, more power is fed to the front. The anti-lock brake system, large enough to be at home on the racetrack, is dynamic too. If it senses a rear wheel about to spin, it will apply braking force to that wheel, even if the car is accelerating.
I think it's not difficult, but it's the secret to do it the right way. And I think that this is where Porsche is really strong.
The systems help you to drive the car very fast, and the borderline with the systems is much more higher than without the systems.
To do it in a way that the car or that the total system really handles like a Porsche, I think that's the secret that our engineers only can do.
The whole car is made to drive fast, and you get a good response from this car.
It's quite important that we do anything in a team approach. So we have some people that really drive the whole thing, but solutions are generated in a team approach. And that's marketing, that's engineering, that's production, that's of course finance. So all the people really come together. The final decision makers, this is our board, there is no doubt about that. And there are some program managers who head the whole thing, but the solutions are really team-driven.
Callaway engineers pride themselves as being part of a team too, but they have their own traditions. In this workshop, it's big V8s and the weekends racing, horsepower and car shows. The first Chevrolet Corvette came out in 1953. Back then it could sell on visual style alone. The first Corvettes were not particularly fast, but the shapes were all testosterone. It was said that if you could make a three-dimensional version of a young man's libido, it would look like this. By the 60s, Corvettes had developed muscles. They were straight-line rockets. Chevrolet had created a niche market and a car that enhanced the Chevrolet image, helping sales right across the range. Through the 70s and 80s, as new technology developed and matured, so did car buyers. Today we live in a technical age. We understand aerodynamics, efficiency, handling. They are words in the brochures of the humblest new car. We live in the age of the technology package. So today's muscle car must be more than just beefcake.
We're first and foremost engine guys. We build great engines. But when you increase the power, even of a good chassis like the Corvette, from 300 to 400 horsepower, we put big demands on the rest of the systems in that car. And so we try to go through the whole car, work on all of the related systems in the automobile, the suspension, wheels and tires, brakes, aerodynamics, everything in that car that goes together to raise the whole automobile up to the standard of the engines that we build.
Enzo Ferrari believed that extra horsepower was the answer to all design problems. And in his day, this was almost true. But there's a practical limit to that concept at the sort of speeds today's fast cars have to travel. An invisible barrier that the car must push against. Air. Air resistance increases at the square of speed. Or in other words, air resistance increases 4 times as speed doubles. The management of air around the car is vital, and designers must know what happens as they deflect it, squeeze it, or thin it. It's deflected through radiators and brake discs for cooling, squeezed onto rear wings to add stability, and thinned around suspension components to suck the car onto the ground. Apart from hitting something at high speed, the major hazard for fast cars is flight. A jumbo jet is 250 times heavier than the Porsche, but it will take off at 252 kilometers per hour. At that speed, these cars are still accelerating. Without an effective front spoiler, air buildup under the front of the car will force it off the ground. That air either has to be swept away fast or applied to a surface that will provide downforce. The Ferrari uses a sealed undertray to accelerate the air under the car. It's shaped like an inverted aircraft wing, so it lowers air pressure and squeezes the car onto the road. The rear spoiler is not just for show. It develops enough downforce that at 320 kilometers per hour, if the road turned upside down, the car would still stick. Aerodynamics affect the Callaway too. Its body modifications don't alter the basic shape of the Chevrolet Corvette, but they do make significant aerodynamic improvements, enhancing its stability at high speed. As important as what you hang into the air is what you hide from it. On the Ferrari Formula One car, the springs and dampers are taken out of the airstream and tucked into the center line of the car. The F50 is the same, running push rods up to the horizontally mounted springs and dampers. Even though he can't see it, this is what the driver of a fast car feels. The car working around him and through him. Downloading data from the car is much easier than measuring a driver's state of mind.
I'm going to go around you, and the very first electrode that I'm placing here is the reference electrode.
Until recently, science had little opportunity to examine the physiology of car control.
We can see different changes possibly while you're making turns, if you're doing sharp turns versus straightaways. And this is a probe that measures the amount of oxygen in your arterial blood. It uses a signal and it picks up the pulsing sensation in your finger.
Giuseppe is being wired into a portable, non-invasive medical monitoring kit developed for another form of high-speed transport, the Space Shuttle. This is the first time it's been used to monitor a high-performance driver. Second by second, Giuseppe's heart rate, breathing, oxygen saturation, eye movement and brain activity are being gathered by sensors and recorded onto a computer memory card. The graph shows the physiology of stress, high heart rate, rapid eye movements and interrupted breathing. Normally, pacemaker neurons in the brainstem control breathing. It's automatic. But Giuseppe is so intensely involved in the physical act of driving that breathing is taken over by the cerebral cortex, a higher authority which occasionally stops it altogether.
You've got the heavy braking. Once you've gotten rid of that braking, then as you prepare setting the car up through the corner, you are on the power because you're trying to apply as much power as is possible for you to stay on the road, but also to give you quick exit speed. And that is stressful. Every single one of these movements, every single one of these corners, when you negotiate it at high speed and you know you've gone through it quick, you invariably feel that it's one small victory.
With every victory comes achievement, and achievement is addictive.
I can see areas where your muscles are very tense and very tonic, and then there are areas where the muscle tension decreases, or you're probably a little more relaxed at that time.
Okay, that probably is when you start turning into a really tight corner. So you're bracing yourself in the car.
We saw a lot of eye movement, a lot of chin activity. Your respirations may have gotten a slight bit more frequent.
There was a lot of eye movement because I was looking out for stones, and if I did see something, I was also trying to determine on what side of the road that I would flow to avoid that stone.
There's no indication in the brainwave patterns of Giuseppe's mood, but the combination of physical indicators suggests fear. Instead, Giuseppe feels pleasure.
It's a very finite line there between pleasure and fright. But if you have the right machine to do it with, then it becomes a pleasure. If you don't have the right machine, then that very quickly turns to absolute fright because you don't have control.
Pleasure is an indicator that endorphins are being released into the brain. It's like the thrill we get after surviving a roller coaster ride. But the difference in a fast car is the pleasure that drivers get from control.
At the end of the drive, what it does is it brings you very close to the machine, and you actually feel that there is such thing as a harmony between a human being and something mechanical. You become very emotional towards a vehicle because you know that there were a couple of moments where you had some moments, and it's just like if you were hanging off a cliff and the person that came and pulled you off that cliff, even though you weren't a friend of his before, but you certainly will become a friend of his real quick. And this car does almost the same thing to you.
To be able to put ourselves in a situation where we have some really powerful system, entity, completely at our control. I'm sure that fighter pilots feel that way. I think the driver of a sports car, the driver of a Callaway Corvette, can drive that car and really feel a totality of the entity. And he, the driver, is the sentient thing in control of that. And that's pretty cool.
Even more extreme mental states can be reached, what psychiatrists describe as complete dissociation.
You become like a person that is sitting in a chair at the cinema. So I just watch around me, and everything has become automatic. So I just watch, and I have a pleasure to see my hands to go, and I don't think. And then you become really part of the car.
Driving anything, even a golf cart, should be fun. There's no doubt that the cars most of us drive are technically competent and have become more so year by year. But what manufacturers don't build into the package is fun, excitement, character.
That's missing. By commercial necessity, that's missing from the basic automobile that you buy today. It's certainly not there in a Honda. It's certainly not even there in a Mercedes. And American cars are probably the furthest from character, with a few exceptions. But I don't think this is a nationalistic issue. I think this is only a creative issue.
With such a strong sense of what a car should be like, it was inevitable that Reeves Callaway would produce his own car, as close to perfect as he could make it.
We've been doing engineering projects for car companies for the past 20 years. Projects come and go, but what's left behind is the experience. We could all see the handwriting on the wall that someday we would pull together all of those experiences and try to incorporate them into an automobile of our own, something that we thought could be commercially successful. We've just started doing that.
But do you have a series of tests you want to do during this practice session?
Just like Enzo Ferrari and Ferdinand Porsche did 50 years before, Reeves Callaway has become a manufacturer in his own right, and he aims to prove his design, the C7, on the track. In this car, he'll go head-to-head against Ferrari and Porsche in the world's toughest long-distance sports car race at Le Mans.
I don't think there's any other way to establish a reputation, a legitimate reputation, against other legitimate folks other than by going into competition with them. And the effects of it, either good or bad, are long-lasting.
Even though this is a new car, it's also a product of the classic cars of the past. They set benchmarks for the present too.
If you sit in a Ferrari 275 GTB today, which was the last of the front-engine 12-cylinder Ferraris, you clearly understand what Enzo wanted in an automobile. He wanted it to look like this, he wanted it to sound like this, he wanted it to feel like this, and he wanted it to do this. But it was very narrow in its focus, appealed only to a certain number of people at the moment. Now, in retrospect, we look back at it and we say, whew, milestone, yardstick, barometer, a great piece of work on all counts. If you list on one hand the cars that we, all of us, consider valuable and desirable, you'll find that they were all made by a man. And they were pretty closely a pure function of what he wanted. Not a committee, not an agreement, not a compromise. It was a clear vision.
Reeves Callaway knows that success on the track will generate demand for a road-going version of the C7. Even those who can't afford it will feel pleasure as it passes by. Perhaps because, like a Porsche or a Ferrari, it's made with passion. At Porsche too, the talk is of new cars, the replacement for the 911. Even Porsche is feeling the constraints of its design envelope. But the search for perfection goes on.
What we can do today with today's knowledge, today's experience, today's science is to get a little closer to a perfect car. So we are getting close to that, but I still think the generation after us, they still have enough to do to engineer perfect Porsche cars.
We look ahead all the time. If you ask to me what is the Ferrari car that you like the most, I have to answer to you the next one, the car that is coming, is not arrived yet. So for us, research is important, technology is extremely important to find the perfection, but it's in the life, I think, is very difficult or quite impossible to be perfect.
A debate about which car is best is pointless. They approach perfection in such different ways. Ferrari, bred to win, an extrovert in an aggressive race suit. Porsche, the cool classic beauty with a science degree. Callaway Corvette, the 90s muscle car, a natural athlete with a top-class coach. If choosing the best is impossible, choosing a favorite is easier and tells as much about your own character as it does about the cars. Together, these cars tell us where we are. They are markers of our time, of technology, culture, and style.
You know, an automobile is a wonderful collection of arts, isn't it? You know? It's its aesthetic, it's its ethic, it's its materials, it's its style, but it also comes alive. You know, that's the nice thing. It runs. It's about the closest thing that we as men who make things can make to making something that's living. I think that that's probably the compelling, underlying aspect of this whole thing.